Hello everyone, and welcome to Orthodox Shahada. I'm Kai, and the topic of this video is the Muslim's dilemma to validate the Quran. Muslims need to demonstrate that Muhammad is a prophet of God and that the Quran is a divinely revealed scripture. In order to demonstrate this, by necessity, Muslims must rely on previously revealed scripture, namely that which was given to Moses and Jesus, the Torah and the Gospel. In so doing, Muslims can take one of two positions. The previous scriptures, which for simplicity I will refer to as the Christian scripture, and by which I mean the sum of the Old Testament and the New Testament, or simply the Bible that is in the possession of the Orthodox Church, are either not corrupt or are corrupt. By corrupt, I mean that Christian scripture does not accurately reflect divine revelation and or divine inspiration in some way. In other words, the correct conception of God and what constitutes the acceptable religion is compromised. If Christian scripture is not corrupt, then reading everything in context and following authentic, that is to say orthodox, apostolic tradition makes it impossible to affirm Muhammad as a prophet of God and the Quran as divinely revealed scripture. Nothing in Christian scripture and apostolic tradition points to Muhammad. Every single attempt by Muslims to locate Muhammad or prophecies of Muhammad in the Bible have been thoroughly refuted. If, on the other hand, Christian scripture is corrupt, then it is illogical to task Christians to use their own scripture in order to validate Muhammad and the Quran. Consider Surah 5, verses 46 to 48. Quote, "And we sent, following in their footsteps, Jesus, the son of Mary, confirming that which came before him in the Torah, and we gave him the gospel, in which was guidance and light, and confirming that which preceded it of the Torah, as guidance and instruction for the righteous. And let the people of the gospel, the Ahlul Injil, judge by what Allah has revealed therein. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the defiantly disobedient. And we have revealed to you, O Muhammad, the book in truth, confirming that which preceded it of the scripture, and as a criterion over it. So judge between them by what Allah has revealed, and do not follow their inclinations away from what has come to you of the truth. To each of you we prescribed the law and a method. Had Allah willed, He would have made you one nation, united in religion, but He intended to test you in what He has given you. So race to all that is good. To Allah is your return altogether, and He will then inform you concerning that over which you used to differ." End quote. What the Quran is telling us in these verses is that there is a visibly identifiable group of people, the Ahlul Injil, the people of the Gospel, Christians, who are to appraise the message of the Quran and the supposed prophethood of Muhammad using the scripture that is in their possession. The Quran is not talking theoretically or hyperbolically. It is clearly identifying an existing body of people who represent the Christian faith and who have authentic scripture in their possession. Now, if this scripture that these Christians possess is corrupt, then it would be absolutely absurd to task these Christians with using that very scripture to give a positive appraisal of the Quran and Muhammad. If the scripture is corrupt, then it is an unreasonable expectation that there will be a positive appraisal of the Quran and Muhammad. So the Quran, by necessity, has to take the position that the scripture that the Christians have is indeed authentic, meaning it is not corrupt. And as verse 47 states, any dismissal of the Quran and Muhammad by these Christians is not to be attributed to any supposed errancy in the scripture, but rather due to disobedience by these Christians to the message conveyed in their scripture. Furthermore, saying that the Christian scripture is corrupt, it stands to reason that it is possible to determine what has and has not been corrupted. Otherwise, you can't make the assertion that there is corruption, since the very notion of corruption is relative to a standard of comparison. Therefore, if you say something is corrupt, then that means you know what the standard of comparison is. It follows then that if it is possible to determine what has and has not been corrupt of the gospel, then we can reconstruct the supposed uncorrupted gospel. And this uncorrupted gospel would be guidance for all of mankind, thereby making the Quran unnecessary. To counter this, Muslims rely on Matthew 15:24. In other words, they rely on supposed corrupt scripture to restrict the scope of the gospel to only Jews. This verse states, "But he," meaning Jesus, "answered and said, quote, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel," end quote. This restriction of the gospel by the Muslims to only the Jews lets them proclaim a privileged position for Muhammad in that the purpose of his prophethood is to be a messenger for all of mankind and not just an isolated community like prior prophets. And likewise, the Quran is to be divine revelation meant for all of mankind. Now, I don't want this video to be a discussion on exegeting Matthew 15:24, because even if we as Christians grant the Muslim their interpretation of this verse, which in reality they are not epistemically justified in doing, but nevertheless let's grant it to them, Muslims can't adequately address the following two problems which have far more damaging consequences for Islam. One, it makes no sense, zero sense, for Muhammad to be the messenger for all of mankind instead of Christ, given that Christ is unquestionably superior to Muhammad in all respects befitting a guide for all of mankind. And two, it is illogical to use the Quran as the standard to validate what is true and false in Christian scripture, because the use of Christian scripture is meant to establish if the Quran is true. It amounts to circular reasoning, assuming the Quran is true to prove that the Quran is true. That's an absurd position. Moreover, if one disregards Christian scripture altogether and simply affirms the truthfulness of the Quran, then this amounts to nothing more than an unsubstantiated claim. I want Christians to understand the polemic here. It doesn't matter how Muslims exegete Matthew 15:24 or any other verse for that matter, if the Muslim claim is that Christian scripture is corrupt. By taking such a position, Muslims altogether lose epistemological access to the entirety of Christian scripture. The problems for Muslims boils down to the following four main points. 1. Muslims impose arbitrary conditions to prove Muhammad and the Quran are true. Only those parts of Christian scripture that Muslims think can be used to prove Muhammad and the Quran true are considered true. There is an a priori rejection of anything that refutes Muhammad and the Quran because Muslims cannot refute Christian scripture. 2. Saying the Quran is Al-Furqan is an unproven and unsubstantiated claim. The burden of proof is on Muslims to demonstrate why the Quran is Al-Furqan, failing which people are justified to reject the assertion and therefore reject Muhammad and the Quran. 3. Muslims cannot establish an independent means of validating Muhammad and the Quran. Validation of Muhammad and the Quran relies on previously revealed Christian scripture, which Muslims have to twist, misinterpret, and falsify in order to make it say what it does not say. And 4. Christians are epistemically justified by scripture and apostolic authority in rejecting Muhammad and the Quran because Christians are not bound by the aforementioned constraints and conditions arbitrarily imposed by Muslims. As a corollary to this last point, consider how traditional Muslims find fault with the Quran-only Muslims who reject hadiths and the Shahada. If hadiths and the Shahada are an integral part of Islamic epistemology, then so too is apostolic pedigree, tradition, and authority for the Christian who belongs to an apostolic church. By virtue of this epistemology, Orthodox Christians are not restricted to scripture alone in demonstrating the falsity of Muhammad and the Quran, just as how traditional Muslims are not restricted to scripture alone in demonstrating the falsity of the Quran-only movement. In conclusion, if Muslims claim that Christian scripture is not corrupt, then Islam can be demonstrably proven to be false using that very scripture and apostolic tradition. If, however, Muslims claim that Christian scripture is corrupt, then 1. Muslims go against Surah 5 verse 47, as it is illogical to task Christians to judge using a corrupt scripture. 2. It is illogical to use corrupt scripture to find Muhammad therein. And 3. Muslims forfeit the right to use that scripture to validate Islam. The big picture is that of epistemology, namely that Muslims have an incoherent epistemology. The most Muslims can do is put forward unsubstantiated claims about Muhammad and the Quran, which Christians are completely epistemically justified in rejecting. Christianity has a coherent epistemology. Christianity affirms prior scripture proves Christianity, and prior scripture is an integral component of Christianity. Islam has an incoherent epistemology. Islam affirms prior scripture refutes Islam, so prior scripture is not an integral component of Islam. Bottom line, Muslims are forced to reject the very thing they need in order to validate Islam, thereby validating Christian epistemology in the process and discrediting their own epistemology.